Okay, so today we're talking about aces in their places, essentially when to engage a professional on our behalf, acting in our best interest, plugging in services where our skills end. And that's the important thing here. So there's a whole bunch we're going to go through today, and they're each important in their own right, obviously cover specific areas of due diligence, essentially. So before we get stuck into how these various people help and when to engage them, there's a couple of, I guess, things I just want to mention broadly before we get into the specifics. That is, there's none on this list that I would say you could bring in too early, because again, I say this in every video, there's power in immediacy. And as soon as you get a hint that there could be something that you want to know about the property that is going to form part of your value equation, then get it known. Make it a known, because it's only going to hold you back later in the process. And this is something I've seen time and time again. So it was just worth mentioning, because if it's a little niggle now, when we get to the pressure cooker that is the offer phase and we've done the rest of the due diligence, we've got this niggling little gap in our understanding, then it stops us from acting decisively, and we go, gee, for the sake of a few $100s, whatever it is, to plug that gap and to get that understood, also to quantify it. And we need to talk, and we will talk about how powerful this is at the pointy end of a transaction and how it actually does impact that price lever that we've spoken about in other videos as well. So that's a really important thing to understand, the immediacy of these guys, and some of them I'll be really specific as to when to bring them in, conveyancers and brokers in particular. So that's one thing that I wanted to sort of get out of the way before we get into the specifics of each of these professionals. And the other one just goes without saying, which is do your research. Every real estate agent is going to have affiliations, and we need to just touch on the importance of independence. Again, it's a big part of a buyer's agent role that we act solely in the buyer's best interest. So there's actually no harm. I don't know any buyer's agents that would have a problem with a buyer calling me up if they're looking to buy on the sunny coast and I'm not professionally engaged with them, but just for some recommendations on who's done good work for my clients, because that can be a good yardstick, I guess, of who's looked after the buyers. Because I'm sure there's cases out there where there's been certain affiliations with sellers to get deals together and things. It just, if at all you're concerned, let's put it that way, if you're concerned at all about the independent nature of some of the advice that you've been given or some of the reports that are coming with the property when you're making your inspections, then get the second opinion, get an independent evaluation, read some Google reviews, obviously, but talk to the people in that area, talk to some buyer's agents. Honestly, I don't think I'm throwing anyone under the bus here, and they're going to get a deluge of calls and texts, because I think that's a good way to share knowledge. So that would be my only other recommendation when it comes to evaluating professionals, and bring them in as soon as possible. They're my two core pieces of advice before we get started. Now, let's get into the specifics of some of the professionals that I recommend when it comes to the real estate transaction. Conveyancers. There to convey. On so many levels, they are vital to the real estate transaction. Good ones are the glue to good transactions and will hold something together when it falls apart. Namely, when it's in the hands of not so great conveyancers and solicitors on the other side. Before we get into conveyancers, it's good to quickly disseminate the difference. Lawyers are there as like an escalation, right? A lot of conveyancers will draw on solicitors' wording for clauses and things that they've done that have got precedent and tested legally, right, to then put into our contract of sale. So you shouldn't need to engage them directly, but because they are typically more expensive, obviously. However, they serve a great purpose when you're bundling things together. And we can talk about some messy divorces. Maybe there's some legal ramifications to exiting a property for other reasons. There's a whole host of reasons why solicitors can actually be preferred. My recommended course of action would be speak to a good conveyancer. Often they'll be part of a big franchise or enough of a resource around them where they can refer to solicitors if they need to. They might actually say, you know what, it's best a solicitor handle this from start to finish. That can be the difference. I would speak to a conveyancer first and ask the question. If it's out of their wheelhouse, you're going to get escalated. If it's something they can deliver with confidence, then stick with the conveyancer. There's no reason not to. They're also property professionals and they know their shit. So I am a big fan of good conveyancers being involved as early as possible. There's no harm, no foul. They're there. Their meat and potatoes is obviously once we've got an executed contract and we're talking about the phase thereafter, managing communications, managing settlement as the end piece, but every check and balance and the dispersion of funds and all that fun stuff, that's held within the conveyancer realm. The other cool thing that conveyancers do is they help clauses get satisfied, is the correct terminology. So we're satisfying these conditions of a contract. And oftentimes if there's anything that needs to be massaged or we're getting close to a deadline, requests that are made officially, pragmatically, in the right language, at the right time frame, that's what you're paying them for. So it's a big deal to have a good conveyancer that's finger on their pulse. These guys operate in such a time-critical environment that, again, it's important to get the right one, because if you miss something in this, then your risk goes through the roof. You can be in breach very easily without even realizing. And someone that has their finger on the pulse to build enough buffer in so you're in the loop, the real estate agent's in the loop, your buyer's agent's in the loop, if you've employed one of those as well. Everyone who needs to know knows ahead of time. It gives that transparency, that clarity. That keeps deals together. Get yourself a good conveyancer early. I spoke in the intro about how to do that. Get some recommendations, have some phone calls, whoever you gel with, and because your communication style needs to be the same, you need to have that reassurance that they're going to perform. So there from the start, you can throw them contracts, anything you get quickly on a property over to them for their interpretation. They check it off before you execute it. I'd always recommend that. They're just there as your primary property advisor. Your other primary is going to be your broker. Now, I say broker as opposed to lender because I like brokers. Brokers are, again, independent. They have a suite of different lenders. And when you've got a suite of different options, it means that you're more likely to have the best rate because you've pressed go once and got a few different options on the table. You've got some comparative analysis straight away. With a lender, one lender, you're often left wondering, might be the best rate. You might have been an existing customer. You've got access to great things. You want to keep it in the relationship. That's totally fine. However, brokers get paid on results. So at the end of the day, you can always ask one, go through the process. And if they do something sharper, then it's a win. If not, again, it hasn't really cost you anything, but it's their job to really make sure that what you're getting is the best product. And their advice is phenomenal when you get the right broker. And again, I've had deals that have stayed together because of kick-ass brokers, where other brokers have let us down as buyer's agents working on behalf of clients. Deals have been lost. So it's mission critical stuff. Same with your conveyancer and the important communication role that they have, the vital communication role that they have. And your brokers and the vital communication role that they have. Again, bring them in as early as you can. They are the two that you should have as soon as you're in property mode. Have your two best friends on speed dial in your favorites, ready to go, because I guarantee you will be calling on them more immediately than you think. And if you're on good terms with these guys and you've moved through as much of the process as you can beforehand, imagine how powerful that's going to be on the transaction end and the deal making end and the offer making phase of the transaction. If you've seen any of my other videos, you know that I would keep going on about this because immediacy and speed and reaction time can often be your competitive edge, won or lost, just in your relationships that you've got around you when you go into transaction mode. So that's conveyancers and solicitors. We can do a deep dive. In fact, I'll be talking to one and breaking down exactly their role and in a future video coming out very soon. And that will help to bolster your understanding, again, of why they're important, what they do, and the critical role that they can play in, again, keeping deals together or protecting your best interests, mitigating risk, avoiding mistakes, very, very expensive mistakes in real estate. I say that a lot as well. When things go wrong in real estate, there's a lot of money on the line. So again, the minimal cost that these guys request in return for their professional services, cheap as chips, really, really is. So I'd encourage everyone to start those conversations if they haven't already. Okay, so your building and pest professionals, you'll see both. And what I mean by both is building and pest inspectors and building inspectors and pest inspectors. Depending where you are, you might have a kick-ass guy that can do both, or you might have an ex-builder that just does building inspections and then a pest guru that you can have in separately. Don't feel like you've got to look for one or the other, or there's any advantages to have two guys if one's qualified. Again, go by recommendations, speak to the local buyers agents there, whatever you can do to get some independent advice. But again, there's a bit of emphasis on the independent side, and that is, yes, it's good because if the building and pest has already been done by someone that's trustworthy and it is truly independent, the relevant insurances are in place that get transferred to the buyer from the seller who's most likely paid for it to be part of the marketing, then that's great. But you are entitled to do your own independent if you don't trust that. But the cool thing about it already being done is that it can help with the immediacy, but your competitive advantage is kind of null and void because everyone has access to that straight away, as opposed to whoever can get in first and tick that box kind of deal. So it's great, but it doesn't necessarily lead to any kind of real advantage. But when it's not there, it gives you the opportunity, if you've already worded someone up, built a relationship, used them before, gone through the process, told them that you've got a tentative date viewing the property and you'll look to do it within 7 days. Can they hold a place for you? All this good stuff that you can do. Hopefully you're starting to pick up a few things between the lines that are all about preparedness and what you can do as a buyer to get yourself as ready as you possibly can to just tick over the edge and tick things off and get it done. Because every day is your competitive edge when it comes to buying property. So that's how to engage them. What they do is fairly obvious. Ex-builders might have a better working understanding of structures than some other building inspectors that aren't necessarily builders or using a trade or whatever, but it is a regulated industry in that they do have to have qualifications and work with certain insurances. So you can't go too far wrong if they've been recommended and you've seen some of the reports and you can ask for a test one as well. That's another good advantage. This is something else I do for my clients. Preparedness. I send them a building and pest report from another property. And they get to ask me all these questions, see the report, understand what it means when something's major versus minor. If you have a working understanding of this document before it lands in your lap and you've got to make a quick decision, you get to make a quicker decision. You understand when you look at a major, whether it's structural or not, or a minor you can live with. There's some minors that I've seen in reports where people are going, oh, I need a second opinion. I need to read this with a fine tooth comb. I'll call my mate who's a builder. I'll send this to them. Mate, you are going to lose your advantage that we've built here. Like the other guys are getting theirs done today and they're going to have their report same day. And if they've done a building or a pest report and they're like before and this lands in their lap and they're confident to act on it, mate, I can't guarantee this property is still going to be available. Again, get hold of a building and pest report before you need a building and pest report, because you can familiarize yourself, ask the inspector any and all questions about what's in that example report, or ask your buyer's agent in this case, because I'll be able to walk you through and allay a lot of your fears, because these are chunky reports, pages and pages and pages long, photos that are zooming in on nasty areas of a home that when you zoom out aren't necessarily that bad in context. A lot of them are minor and major defects we can talk about. But I've seen buyers and had buyers get hung up on the small details that in hindsight, they're like, oh, that wasn't worth sweating about. But they've put so much risk on the line. And in one case in particular, missed out on a property because they weren't quite ready or comfortable with what they were reading. But had they had exposure to a report before, they would have acted with confidence and secured that property, but instead missed out. So there's a lot of value in getting that done. I would request a dummy report. That's the lesson there, I guess. The pest guys are awesome. Timber pest is huge. And that's obviously the main thing they're looking at. White ant activity, timber pests, termites, whatever you want to call them. That needs to be thoroughly checked out with access to as much of that property as possible. It can be a big financial burden to a buyer to rectify any issues, and you want to know and just get that assurance that whatever management is in place is current. And if it's not, then those recommendations can be acted on. If they do find termites, whether they're alive or whether it's past activity that has been rectified, all these things are really important when we talk about a building and pest report. And the cool thing with these inspectors is they can often recommend what needs to be done to rectify things. Cool. So in my experience, they're not going to go ahead and quote things and do all that sort of thing and give you a really cool run sheet of exactly what needs to be spent on a property straight away. Please don't expect that. They'll be able to maybe give you a ballpark, but most of the time aren't even comfortable doing that. Just saying, call the relevant people that can do that. Here's a good contact and here's a good contact, and start the quote process with them. Great. If that's them and they're professional services, referring to other professional services, and it's moving you through your decision-making phase that another buyer's going to have to go through anyway, then brilliant. Off you go. Do what you got to do. So a building and pest guy's really, or girl, is going to be really important to have on side and for you to be familiar with it before you even need to go into it. That's the lesson there. There are plenty of instances where going above and beyond I don't want to simplify what they do or by any means undervalue what they do. But if you need to go beyond a basic, just still thorough building and pest report, I'd be careful about the audience and stuff that are listening to this, but they are experts in what they do, but they will often be the ones to defer you to specific experts that will give you further insight into different areas or risk profiles of different areas of a home before purchase. Some of these include a pool. Pools can be very expensive very quickly if the equipment is deemed to be failing or have failed. If a fiberglass shell is past its use by date, and in Queensland they bake and they fade and they do have a shelf life. Concrete ones still, you can still have cracking and need to be relined, resealed, things as well. There are guys, I've literally had a guy get into his scuba gear and dive into the pool with a brush to check whether it was iron oxide in the agate that was used to spraycrete in the pool or whether it was a crack in the Rio coming through and water seeping into foundations. Like, we can get as granular as we need to in some of these instances, and it can be worth it. Again, it mitigates risk. And the outlay is often worth the peace of mind. It allows you to make better decisions, et cetera, et cetera. So a pool guy is one. A building and pest guy generally won't be a pool guy. Sometimes they do, and they can do this pool safety cert and everything else that you need as well in different states and territories. So yeah, that can be useful. Solar can sometimes be worth getting checked as well. And you can get a solar inspector out for obvious reasons to check the efficiency of the panels, the age of the system, the output, the wiring, all the rest of it. Electricians in general can be helpful. A big one here in Queensland is a structural engineer. And it sounds heavy, it sounds over the top. We have a lot of pole homes and we have a hell of a lot of retaining walls. Retaining walls don't last forever. And when we've got a dwelling with a hell of a lot of earth being held back in various spots or held up in certain spots where the slab's been poured for the house to be on, and there's seasons like we have here with the amount of moisture management that needs to be in place is immense. Building and pest guys will attest to this as well. Moisture management is the biggest thing, like having clear perimeters and just having somewhere for the water to go when it rains properly up here is a big thing. And ventilation and things, so you're not getting mold, and a healthier way to live. There's all sorts of stuff that they can help you navigate as well with properties. But structural engineers are people I've had to call in before. There's been instances, footings on properties. The building pest guys like, look, this is beyond me. For that to be deemed safe, you're going to need an engineer out here. And he was able to come out and go, nope, this needs to be chopped off, re-welded, refooted, drilled further down. I can tell that's not how it's meant to be. This is a big area of risk and will cost X amount per stump. And look, there's 10 of these that need to be done. Cool. We built that into the price, and the owner was like, whoa, had no idea. So sorry. Yes, that all makes sense. Of course, the next buyer is going to find the same thing. So off we go. We got a good deal across the line that basically just factored in that, and the tradies were actually doing it. We got a clause in there. This is how else it can be used strategically. A clause in there that the tradies were in there before it even settled. So subject to settlement, the tradies were able to complete the work for, without finding any further issues. Awesome, right? Bet you some of these buyers like listening like, what? You can do this. You can do this if you've got a good enough relationship with the agent and we're clear and transparent about what we do. It wouldn't be the first time that I've put a clause in there to say settlement is subject to completion of works satisfactory without any further issues arising on, because they could, sometimes they're like, look, we won't tell how bad X problem is until we've started. Right, and we don't want to be under contract with the price all locked in and everything with that risk over our heads. So we build in some mitigation for our clients, you guys, the buyers. Cool. So structural engineers are a really good one as well. That was worth touching on because it's like building inspectors on steroids, and they can really kind of obviously get to the crux of big issues and big risk factors with dwellings and the wider land profile that often comes along with sloping homes and terraced parts of land and all sorts of stuff, even neighboring blocks and stuff too. Like it's definitely worth having in your back pocket should you want to feel more comfortable about what you're purchasing. To that end, talking about engineers, there's also surveyors as well that can come out and help you map things. So while we're looking at the structure, there's just some weird blocks out there. There's some weird subdivisions. These guys work in tandem often with town planners and the data that's available. They're another professional. Town planners that we'll talk about in a second. They can be invaluable. But you want to make sure what you're buying is what you're buying. And if you're getting some fresh boundary pegs and you find that, this is an issue even in newer subdivisions. Don't think this is just old acreage stuff or farms where you've got, X amount of reclaimed land and you can move a boundary peg 10 meters over and things like there's some things that are worth knowing about the property. The cool thing about boundary pegs and knowing your boundary, I should say more specifically in property, is that councils will have things like setback rules and fence setbacks and things, and you can build to zero boundary in some instances, all sorts of stuff that is either going to make or break the deal for you as the buyer, because you might see value in this property going, this will only work for me if I can make this side access work. And you might be nervous that side access actually runs over a neighbour's boundary, or that maybe it's not going to be quite enough and you need to know whether that's the hard boundary or maybe it's a little bit further and gives you that opportunity. Surveyors can be awesome. They can be really good, especially if you want to fence a property as well. Before you do that, there's a lot of soft boundaries, I call them, I don't know whether there's a proper term for it, but I call it soft boundary if there's no hard fence separating two blocks. And that can be a good thing to know when we're talking about properties as well before we purchase. If we want to run a fence to know exactly where that can and cannot be. You'll see every single ad on realestate.com and on Domain and on an agent's flyer for the property will state that boundaries are indicative only or for reference only. And that's because, it's not a known and it can't be used exact to a meter because, they don't want to be held liable for getting something a little bit wrong. And they'll use basic mapping data to do that. And that's where it can be really advantageous to have a surveyor come out and perform those measurements exactly for you, give you that peace of mind. When we zoom out a little bit, surveyors work really well with town planners. Town planners are there for a bit of a wider scope. Micro and macro, I shouldn't say that. They're really good with defining what you've found on council maps or what's been provided to you in building plans and all that sort of stuff as well, because there's so much that these guys can tell you is either a green light or a red flag. And they can be big ticket items too. I'm talking whether downstairs has been approved, council approved to be built in, whether it conforms with council bylaws of that's a habitable zone or not. If you're buying a 5-bedroom home that's technically only a 3-bedroom home, then it hugely affects the price and the functionality of the home. Whether or not it's approved, whether or not it's functional, you certainly shouldn't be paying for it. If it is something that can be submitted to council subject to DA approval, whatever it is, then make your contract subject to that. There's no point wearing the risk. If another buyer wants to do that, and that's on them, all well and good. But I would never recommend a client take on that risk profile. I would always make something subject to. And that should be the owner's responsibility to do before you transact. And again, you need to have that walk away mentality or far out. It's not my job to break deals. Like at the end of the day, if my clients turn around, if you're the buyer, it's a misnomer anyway. Like if you're not too worried and it doesn't really add any value for you, so it's either there or it's not, or if it's a relative bargain in your perspective, or if you're buying it for the land value, like there's certain times where you're still going to transact at the level that's been agreed to before you found this out. But most of the time, it's going to greatly affect the value of the assets. So it's just something to be aware of. Town planners can be really good at that. They can also give you really good insight into the zone you're buying into, any infrastructure changes that are going to be happening, any potential planning changes that could be coming up, any planning things that exist in the area already that are going to have an immediate impact. There's a whole range of benefits that town planners can bring to the table in wider due diligence and really narrowing it down to the property as well. Defining easements, what you can and can't do depending on the type of easement, and the covenants from councils and developers. They can interpret all this. They've also got precedents. They can tell you what's more likely to get through, what they can do, some of the workarounds they've found. They've got some good relationships with local councils. They can talk to you about specific scenarios or who to talk to get further clarification, all that good stuff. Really, really important stuff. Comes to putting together a deal on a property from an informed perspective. This is all information gathering and risk mitigation. Those two marrying up. Town planners are also good from a foliage point of view. I'm going to say the flora point of view. I've got a great relationship with someone who's helped me a lot with identifying what we can and can't do with trees overhanging properties or protected vegetation covenants and things that are going on. We've got protected veg, we've got koala habitat corridors, we've got all sorts of things, and flood risk and things as well. So other macro impacting environmental factors when we're looking at buying a property as well. And if we find out that the vegetation we thought we could clear, or the agent told us we could clear, we can't actually clear, then, and we want to clear, I should say as well, then that again can affect where you see value, which will affect the price. And yeah, it should all be becoming fairly obvious now why these professionals can help you put yourself in a very educated an informed position ahead of going to offer. Next one, guys, is valuers. So there is actually, I love these guys so much and the strategic advantage they can bring to the table that I've actually dedicated an episode to them already that should be uploaded before this one, so we can mention that. And I'd encourage you, if you want more detail, to definitely do a bit of a deep dive, because it becomes such a vital part of the price journey. The what am I trying to say here? When your price discovery, because there's so much that goes into it from a pricing perspective, how to accurately price a property and protect yourself from overpaying and all that good stuff. There's market factors and emotional factors. There's competitive factors. There's seller circumstances. There's all sorts of stuff. Obviously, even stuff like we've talked about with town planners and even structural engineering stuff we've come up with. Just going, look, with the retaining walls, all need to replace this $100,000 worth of earthworks to be done on this property, so it's been priced accordingly. Whatever. There's a whole bunch. But when it comes to valuers, they're really the last word on property prices. And they act independently. They advise to your lenders. If you're not a cash buyer and you're subject to finance, these guys are going to be involved anyway. If you can find out from your broker or your lender who they typically use, there's a piece of software that these guys use, and it escapes me, and it's really annoying for the purpose of this. But they basically, a bank or a lender will just go bang onto this piece of software and go, this address needs to be done, and then these contractors will pick it up and go with it. So they'll have their like preferred list or whatever, but it's never a known that I'm certainly not going to say for the purpose of this video that when you get an independent valuation that is the price they're going to accept and lend against, because it very rarely correlates exactly, but it will help. And I have personally had instances where the lenders have gone, great, you've got your own one. Yep, great, that's who we usually use anyway. We're happy to do that and not do a physical site visit now. We'll take this, or we'll do our own curbside and marry that up, make sure, whatever. Like it's a good thing to have. It's never going to put you at a disadvantage. It's only going to be an advantage. They don't cost very much considering the value you get from it, the peace of mind and the confidence to figure out your bandwidth of where you're comfortable paying for the property and when you're going to be actually stretching yourself, or when you're going to be overpaying on the market value, but whether that's still value to you, you might still have a little buffer there. It all comes down to that foundational understanding of what the property is actually worth in real time. So yeah, valuers can be really good. I'm not going to go into any more detail than that because it's covered really, really in depth. And there is, again, an episode coming where I'm talking to a valuer here on the sunny coast who's very good at what he does and breaks down his role really easily, better than a buyer's agent can explain it. Speaking of buyer's agents, yeah, we're in there. And it is a professional service I do want to touch on. I'm acutely aware that the Academy and my mission to be sharing as much information as humanly possible about this and holding nothing back it's still worth mentioning here. And it's not a pitch. This is simply something that I think can add a lot of value. It can give you that confidence. It can, I often act as a conduit. I have existing relationships with all of the professionals who I've just mentioned. So it's a great one-stop shop as a consumer to just organize everything we do need and nothing we don't, to put ourselves in the most competitive, informed position as quickly as possible. I can often get, not mates rates, but certainly get preferential treatment to get things done maybe faster and pull some strings if I need to and ask for favors. All those good things that come with working with these guys and having preferred suppliers. So yeah, a buyer's agent can actually be bloody helpful. And yeah, it's something that is there should you want it, and certainly not necessary because that's the whole reason for bringing this to life. But I'd encourage you to consider how that professional service can help expedite what you're trying to achieve and can help give you a better chance of success and also decrease your risk factors. So that's all that we really need to say, isn't it, on buyer's agents? But look, that's probably a wrap here, guys, on everything that is professional services. As I said, there's deep dives available on some of these and more to come. But again, if you've got any questions, please reach out either to myself or some of the professionals in your area to seek clarity on the experts themselves and what they do and what they can bring to the table. Let's buy better.